Okay, looks like we are live on Facebook in the discussion group. And I just want to welcome everybody who's joining us to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work. Each week we have a live call talking about some of our MWEG initiatives and how you can get involved encouraging each other and building community here in MWEG. So we're glad to have you join us. This week we have Megan Woods. She's our Senior Director of the Nonpartisan Route for MWEG, and she'll be talking to us about the power of a nonpartisan political identity and what that might mean for us as members of MWEG, and what it might look like for each of us as we consider how we might research candidates for future elections. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Megan, and she can explain that a little bit more and share with us.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I am talking today about, like Rachel said, political identity and having a nonpartisan political identity, which is something a lot of us might not really consider until, those of us that are involved with MWEG are probably considering this more. So we're going to start by thinking about identity outside of politics. And we all have an identity. We have an identity of the way we view ourselves and the way we want other people to view us, whether they do or not. So I want you to think about some of the things that you identify with. What labels would you use to describe yourself? I think a lot of us start with our nationality, our culture, our hometown, maybe where we currently live. These are part of who we are, right? We can also, and feel free to put in the comments, and Rachel, if you tell me anything that people are writing, some of your identities, you might identify as, the kind of hobbies we do, as a pianist or a quilter, a good cook, which I am not. So a lot of people identify with what they enjoy doing. We might identify with a sports team we support. If you're a Yankees fan, that's a big part of who you are. Our education, I know that where I went to college is important for me because I feel like it tells a lot about who I am. Your career, of course, we all, we are not just, like, my husband doesn't just teach school, he is a teacher. That's who he is. And that's a part of his identity. We have silly identities, if we're, well, maybe not silly to you. If you're a cat person or a dog person or a morning bird or early bird or night owl, those are kinds of things that we use to describe ourselves. And sometimes we describe ourselves by our relationships with others, including, like, for me, I'm a daughter of writers. So that's a big part of who I am. I like that about myself, that I was raised by people who write and love language. I'm around here where I live, known as the music teacher's wife, which has its pros and cons. And a lot of us identify as moms because of our children. But then I was thinking about this identity as moms, but we break it down. It's not just that I'm a mom. We might identify as a new mom, or a mom of a toddler, a mom of a troubled teen, a soccer mom, a mom of a child with autism, or a child with a chronic illness, a mom of valedictorian. We have all these identifiers that separate us even more, even when we have a big connecting thing like being a mom. So I was thinking, what is the point of having an identity? What good does it do to us? We all have them, and we all have our chosen identity, as well as things that are thrust upon us. Like, nobody chooses to be the mom of somebody with chronic illness, but it becomes part of who we are. So what is the point of that? Couple of things I thought of was, first, our identities give us a chance to share our own story. So if you're a member of the church and I identify myself as a returned missionary, you automatically know some things about me, and our conversation might change a little if you wanted to start asking questions about that or know more about it. You also, when you have an identity, you find support and compassion. For example, if I were to identify myself as a mom of a child with dyslexia, I'm going to find other moms who are raising children with dyslexia. We're going to support each other. We're going to, find resources together. And that is a great reason to have an identity. And the third reason I thought of is that you find a place to belong. My husband is Native Hawaiian, and I am obviously not, but he is. And wherever we move, as soon as we get into a ward, if there's another family in the ward that's Pacific Islander, they will immediately adopt us as part of their family. And this is wherever we move. If you are from an island, or your parents are, your family, and I'm part of that family, even though I'm not Hawaiian, because of my husband and kids. So those are some of the great reasons to have these identities. Identities are not negative. They describe us, they help us, and they help us find our place. So we can take our identities and choose what we want to identify most with. For example, I have chosen to identify a lot with the Hawaiian identity of my husband. And so that plays into, the way I raise my kids, what we focus on, the kind of history we talk about, the cultural events we go to. That's an identity I've chosen to focus on. But when we make these choices, what it does is we choose our life priorities and what matters most to us. And I was thinking about this last week, what identities are most important. And just lucky for me, President Nelson gave a devotional address on Sunday to young adults. And he had the same identities that he thinks are most important. So this is what he said. I believe that if the Lord were speaking to you directly tonight, the first thing he would make sure you understand is your true identity. My dear friends, you are literally spirit children of God. Second, as a member of the church, you are a child of the covenant. And third, you are a disciple of Jesus Christ. Tonight, I plead with you not to replace these three paramount and unchanging identifiers with any others, because doing so could stymie your progress or pigeonhole you in a stereotype that could potentially thwart your eternal progression. I really appreciated that. And out of the context, I haven't watched the whole devotional. So taking that out of context and putting it in a political context, or any kind of context, even the context of identifying as we do with some of the identities I mentioned earlier, if we put those first in our life, they can pigeonhole us into a stereotype. And they can even get in the way, especially a political identity can get in the way of our eternal progression. So we want to focus on these three identities of a child of God, a child of the covenant, and a disciple of Christ. And everything else we do, we could choose to view through the lens of those identities. So in other words, we could think of like my education is significant to me beyond the degree, because as a child of God, I ought to be learning throughout my life. That's part of being his child and wanting to become like a heavenly parents. My family heritage and the identity I get from that is important to me, because it's really helped me to understand covenant Israel and what it means to be part of a covenant and part of something bigger than myself. And being a mom for me is meaningful because it helps me progress in discipleship. And if I'm viewing being a mother through discipleship, then those other breakdowns of mom, or even if you're not a mom, they don't matter as much, because we're all trying to be disciples. And so we can all relate to each other that way. So going back to what is the point of having an identity? First, I mentioned sharing a story. We all have stories. And so as children of God, we recognize that everyone else is also a child of God. And so their stories are of as much value and worth as ours are. And then we want to find support and compassion. And of course, this is essential in life. We need each other. But when we shift our lens to viewing this as a child of the covenant, it's not just about finding support and compassion. It becomes about being supportive and compassionate. And so we shift our focus to other people's needs. And but then it's very mutual. We find support and belonging with each other. And the third reason I had mentioned is a place to belong. And obviously, it's really nice to find a place of belonging with other believers and other disciples. But the really cool thing about identifying as a disciple of Christ is that instead of pushing people out, like I mentioned, being a mom of somebody with dyslexia, if I had a Facebook group about that, and moms came in and were starting to talk about other things, would say, hey, this group is about dyslexia, move on. But as a disciple of Christ, you don't push people out, you pull people in. You're trying to draw people in regardless of their own identities or their own beliefs. So it's really different than any other thing. So we're not seeking belonging. We are trying to become a place of safety and belonging for other people. So we want to apply all of this to politics. Okay, our political identities in this country are really strong. They are perhaps at this point in the world, perhaps the strongest part of identifying who we are. And in the current climate, it becomes very tribalistic, and those identities dominate so much of life. On social media, where we shop, what celebrities we support, what kind of entertainment we have, all of these things, politics plays a role in all of it. And so it's all part of our identity. So we are trying to break free of that. And so we want to view our political identities through the lens of being a child of God, a child of the covenant, and a disciple of Christ. And so we want our involvement in politics to actually help our progress in these religious areas. So as a personal experience, I've always paid attention to politics, but not done much about it. And when I was in a lot of personal turmoil, like having a lot of anxiety and stress over the political climate. And a friend added me to a brand new group called Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And when I found MWEG, it was a whole new way to approach politics. At first, I was really skeptical because the mix of religion and politics in my mind leads to extremism. So I kind of held back and just watched for a while. But I found here a place that I could find political peace. I didn't know that was possible. A partisan identity became a very insignificant part of what we are doing here, but our religious identity can become stronger. And it helped me find peace because it gave me something to do other than just sit there being anxious all the time. I've actually had my discipleship and my testimony of my heavenly parents increase because I feel stronger now that I see how they love and care for each of their children. And I have learned, I'm talking to other members of MWEG who talk openly about their covenants and how they want to put their covenants into action through their political activism. And also political involvement has interestingly helped me draw closer to Christ, which is a really wonderful thing. I want to quote from David French. If you don't know who David French is, he is a columnist and author. He works for the Dispatch currently. He's conservative and evangelical. And if you are looking for somebody that can help, find a more right-leaning point of view that's very rational and very insightful, I would recommend following David French. He, a couple years ago, wrote an article called The Spiritual Blessing of Political Homelessness. And he talks about his own journey away from a partisan identity to one that he calls being politically homeless. And he says he talks to a lot of people who say they are trying to follow biblical principles, and they'll follow this principle and that principle, but they don't line up with a political party. And he says that these people ask him, where do I fit in? And he says the answer is clear: nowhere. And that truth is a blessing if you embrace it. In our church, we consistently get statements around every election season that say principles compatible with the gospel may be found in various political parties. And the opposite of that is also true. Principles not compatible with the gospel are found in all political parties. And so we need to carefully not look to the political party to find a savior. If we want a savior, we look to the actual savior. And so we want to put our identity as disciples of Christ first. And when we do that, it becomes a lot easier to discern which principles are compatible with the gospel and which are not in the various political parties. David French said, even if the parties were united in achieving biblical goals, then the means of pursuing those goals would still be subject to debate. And that's something we need to really remember, for example, if the biblical goal to care for the poor, but how do we go about doing it? There's going to be a million different ideas. And because somebody has a different idea than you, doesn't mean that they're not also pursuing that same goal. And we want to remember that. At a symposium I went to, I heard former Congressman Ben McAdams speaking, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing because I was just listening to him, but he said, when you start talking to people and learn to understand their why, you find commonality. And then you can talk about how you should proceed. Often our whys are the same, but the hows are very different. We can find compromise on the how if we respect the why. And so that's something we want to remember when we, and when we let go of a partisan identity, we can recognize that other people have good intentions, even if their methods are different. And then we can start to find the compromise that we need. When we're really partisan and that's part of our identity, what we tend to do is dig in our heels. We get really defensive, and then we take issues and we actually make caricatures of them. We make them very simplistic and almost cartoonish. And we can't find solutions that way because we're just yelling at each other. So if we let go of partisanship, we can discuss the nuance and complexity of various issues and then find workable solutions together. President Oakes has spoken about politics in a couple of general conferences recently, and he said, there are many political issues and no party, platform, or individual candidate can satisfy all personal preferences. Each citizen must therefore decide which issues are most important to him or her at any particular time. Then members should seek inspiration on how to exercise their influence according to their individual priorities. This process will not be easy. It may require changing party support or candidate choices, even from election to election. And he also said such independent actions will sometimes require voters to support candidates or political parties or platforms whose other positions they cannot approve. That is one reason we encourage our members to refrain from judging one another in political matters. We should never assert that a faithful Latter-day Saint cannot belong to a particular party or vote for a particular candidate. So when we let go of our partisanship, we become more educated. We have to study issues. We have to study candidates to make informed choices. We can't just rely on a party to do that for us. And President Oakes says it will not be easy, but when something is a little harder, it actually gives us more power and more influence. So going back to David French and that one article that Rachel posted the link to, he says, when he encourages people to declare independence from their political affiliation, he makes it clear that this does not mean you have to vote third party. It doesn't mean you cannot work for a politician or in politics, and you can still run for office. You can still, and you ought to take positions on issues. But he suggests that we hold our political affiliation very, very lightly. He said, your commitment to Christ is permanent and eternal. Your commitment to a party or a politician is transient and ephemeral. So sometimes in an environment like we live in, where this political tribalism is such an important part of everyday life. So being politically homeless can be pretty hard. There's a lot of comfort in political belonging. And that's one of the major reasons we choose the identities that we do, is to find belonging. But I'm going to suggest that as disciples of Christ, and I know this is not the first or only time we're going to feel very lonely. Disciples look outward and try to create a place for others to come in and find safety and belonging, and instead of looking to belong in the world. If you read that article from David French, he talks about many ways that becoming politically homeless increases his influence in the world. And especially as he identifies, and as we do as disciples of Christ. So I want to talk about, and these are, now I'm moving on from David French. These are 4 unexpected ways that you might find political power by letting go of a partisan identity. Okay, and the first one is through compassion. Your compassion can increase when you no longer have your tribe, have your group, when you are able to look out from yourself. Compassion includes loving your neighbor and your so-called enemy. And then you often find that your enemy is not actually an enemy. Can you tell me what Jill just said, Rachel?
Yeah, Jill just said, I can see how it would give you more power when office holders and candidates can't always count on your support no matter what they do. They will actually be responsive to your ideas. And I think that's good because then they're actually going to act, right? I think that's what Jill is saying. They're going to act for your interests versus,
Right.
just on what's good. So yeah, that gives us more power as voters.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when they know they can count on your vote, they will do whatever they want. I like that. Thank you, Jill. So yeah, so what the power of compassion comes from loving your enemies. You can get out there, you can defend the rights of others, even people very different from you, can be involved in social justice and activism. And you get to be involved in breaking down stereotypes. And you can just live with the golden rule in mind all of the time. Another aspect of compassion is that, and this is a power, you assume good of others. So you operate from a basis of compassion and goodwill. And instead of feeding on the vilification of opposite parties, you find ways to cooperate and hopefully work with bipartisanship. And so we want to encourage letting go of partisanship with our elected leaders so that they can actually find solutions instead of just yelling about how the other side is so evil, right? President Oakes, again, he said, in a democratic government, we will always have differences over proposed candidates and policies. However, as followers of Christ, we must forego the anger and hatred with which political choices are debated or denounced in many settings. Okay, we cannot find solutions when we're just angry. And the third part of compassion that I wanted to mention is defending the rights of others. The golden rule, which talks about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so when you have compassion, you can powerfully support things that enable others to participate fully in society. And we all benefit. We should celebrate each other's successes. We all benefit when our neighbors are being successful. You know, we work together. And again, from President Oakes, knowing that we are all children of God gives us a divine vision of the worth of all others and the will and ability to rise above prejudice and racism. And I would include partisanship, which I think is a word I just made up. Okay, the second powerful thing about, and Rachel, tell me if there are any comments that I'm missing. The second powerful thing about letting go of a partisan identity is the power of community. Community is such an important part of life. And when we become more and more partisan, we divide so much, and we don't want to do that. We want to be coming together. So the first part of community is connectedness. A city is more than a collection of households. A community is a living thing in itself. We work together. We need to cooperate and respect each other and each other's rights and each other's contributions. President Oakes said, try getting to know each other. In countless circumstances, strangers' suspicion or even hostility give way to friendship or even love when personal contacts produce understanding and mutual respect. Community, there's a lot of power in living in a place where you can depend on your neighbors, where you can trust them and get along. I think we like that. And so we want to create it where we live. Second part of community is to seek common good rather than just a self-interest. This goes along with diversity. In a gospel topics essay on our church website called Citizenship, it tells us to support measures that strengthen moral society and that we should show an interest in the common good, especially in our communities. We want to socialize with people who are poor and needy, socialize with people who are of different races, different cultures, and different classes, you know, noble classes, and also to make sure to include the outcasts, the societal outcasts in that this is part of citizenship, it's part of community, and it can make us stronger as we can, you know, learn more stories and create better solutions. The third part about community is civic engagement. And this includes religion and the engagement that helps our communities be strong. So many ideas for civic engagement. And what we talk a lot about things like being poll workers or campaign volunteers. But there's also things like local food banks, being involved with the PTO or PTA, any kind of volunteer work with refugees, with the homeless, with nursing homes. Where I live, 4-H is still a really big deal. So you have other places, you have Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brother, places where you can donate blood, organize neighborhood cleanups, volunteer with the Red Cross, the local farm bureau. There's all kinds of organizations, trade associations, school committees, chambers of commerce, all kinds of places where we can become civically involved and strengthen our communities and feel like we're giving back and also making friends. And we become more powerful and as a whole when we are engaged with each other. The third aspect of finding political power by letting go of your partisan identity is with trust. Trust is a tricky thing these days. We don't trust each other, and that's contributing to the animosity and hate in the world, quite frankly, and it's hurting us. So we want to trust, and the first thing we want to trust in America is the Constitution. We want to have our commitment to the Constitution. We want to be able to feel ownership in the democracy that we are involved in and in its laws. So we need to develop a mutual trust and respect to find problem solving. Going back to President Oakes again, he said loyalty to established law instead of temporary allies is the best way to love our adversaries and our enemies as we seek unity in diversity. The United States was founded by immigrants of different nationalities and different ethnicities. Its unifying purpose was not to establish a particular religion or to perpetuate any of the diverse cultures or tribal loyalties of the old countries. Our founding generations sought to be unified by a new constitution and laws. And this is something that can still unify us today, but we need to trust it, trust the Constitution. The second thing I want to trust is our institutions. We have things that work wonderfully about our government. Not everything does, but we can't work to improve those things if we don't trust that we can improve them, that they're worth improving. So we want to respect our institutions and the peaceful voting methods we have. And we also want to actually support taxation, pay a full tax, and trust the important role that taxation plays in a complex society. We need infrastructure and investment, education, and safety nets for poor. We need science, and all these things depend on our taxes. So we have to have a basic belief that government is good, that it's there for our benefit, not to hurt us. And then that respect for government will play into how we respect public servants, including police and teachers, scientists, and other government officials, including diplomats and all who work. And, even those in our local elections, our neighbors that work on those things, we want to trust these things. And the third thing, Rachel, did you have something you want to say? Oh, you're muted.
No, I was taking some notes and
okay.
Texting other MWEG people saying, this is just what we need to hear right now, because I like that we're bringing it back to the basics of our faith and the Constitution and just basic good government practices. And so as I'm writing my notes and thinking about it, I'm thinking this is just what we need to remember as members of MWEG. We are a faithful, nonpartisan group, right? And proactive, and those are our basic principles. And so here, it's just speaking truth to me that as you're sharing these thoughts with us, that we want to remember what makes MWEG so special and unique as women and as members, and that we want to keep participating and understand what the base is and where we want to put our ideas and our thoughts and start at the faith level, as well as doing the work to remember what is most important for our country, right? So no, I just appreciate that. And that's what I'm doing. No thoughts. That's what I have to share. So thank you, but keep going, keep going.
All right. Well, the third thing I'd written down that we want to trust is each other. We don't want to blame everyone else for the decline of our country or our government. We want to get involved and be part of making it better. And then we might find that the people we were blaming also want to make it better and are also doing their part. So without this basic trust, what happens is we disengage ourselves from politics and society, and we ignore our civic obligations. President Oakes said we should learn and advocate the inspired principles of the Constitution. We should seek out and support wise and good persons who will support those principles in their public actions. We should be knowledgeable citizens who are active in making our influence felt in civic affairs. If we don't trust the Constitution, the institutions, and each other, we're just going to break down and stop trying. And that is not good. Okay, the fourth way, it's through the power of hope. Okay, so hope is, it's kind of, it seems like a fickle pie in the sky kind of word, but hope is a really powerful thing when we look at it through the scriptures. The scriptures define it as something that is an anchor to us, to our souls. And so it's not like this wishful thing, it's something that gives us grounding and something to move forward with. So with hope, we want to have a love of our country, including our history. We want to respect the founding documents and the ideals of the past and look for ways to implement them today in the current culture we live in. We want to have faith in our other citizens and look for people who help us to feel hopeful for the future rather than fearful. The fear is breaking us. Two Yale University scholars recently reminded us, for all its flaws, the United States is uniquely equipped to unite a diverse and divided society. Its citizens don't have to choose between a national identity and multiculturalism. Americans can have both. But the key is constitutional patriotism. We have to remain united by and through the Constitution, regardless of our ideological disagreements. The second part of hope is optimism, which goes hand in hand with hope. We want to be optimistic about the future of our own future, our future for our family, optimistic about the future of our community. And we do that really by seeing the good in each other and then being the good, getting out there and trying to be involved and trying to make a real difference. And sometimes when you're trying to be involved, it can get pretty discouraging. And so you have to go back to the basics and remember that you're doing this because you have hope. And the third item of hope is actually from a quote from President Oakes. He said, "We should trust in the Lord and be positive about the nation's future." So again, when I started, I said, we don't want to look to a political party to save us. Our Savior is the Savior. And again, that's where we're going to end too, with we need to put our trust in the Lord and know that we can have a positive future. President Ballard, M. Russell Ballard, said, "Our nation was founded on prayer. It was preserved by prayer, and we need prayer again. I plead with you to pray for this country, for our leaders, for our people, and for the families that live in this great nation founded by God." And then Moroni said, "Wherefore there must be faith. And if there must be faith, there must also be hope. And if there must be hope, there must also be charity. If you have no hope, you must needs be in despair, and despair cometh because of iniquity." We do not want to have the despair. That is just defying. It just kills us. So we want to have the hope. And hope goes hand in hand with having faith in God and having charity, loving each other and building communities. So these are the powerful things that can happen when we let go of nonpartisan identity. And it's just some of the things that can happen. And I am open for questions or comments if anybody has anything you want to say here.
I can say that one of the comments on Facebook, it says, this is really powerful. I don't seek to belong. It says, don't seek to belong, seek to be a place of safety and belonging. And that's from Laura Clements and in the Facebook discussion group. And I like that. It's where are we looking, right? You're explaining to us, let's look to the Savior, let's look to our faith versus instead of looking to our politicians, right? And I think that's where some of our we get displaced, and then we get kind of stuck in that group. I'm trying to think if I see any other ones.
Okay, I have something. I was brushing my, I stayed off camera because I was getting dressed, and I'm dressed now, but my hair is still crazy. But anyway, so I love everything you've been saying. And I was like, gosh, I need to get this from Megan and then like lobby my stake president to like, let me give this talk somewhere, because I was like, and maybe I could swing it because she totally quoted all kinds of general authorities. So it's totally a church talk, because I feel like there were so many things that people need to hear and to know and to understand. So that's just number one. That was fabulous, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I wanted to say that one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, even though I made the comment before about how we can have more power when we are less partisan, because, you know, that our candidates and our elected officials can't rely on us to just go with the team no matter what they do. I also, I guess, question and wonder about how we really can have power within the construct of our current two-party system. For example, I am a registered member of a political party. I live in Colorado, where we have a caucus system. And so I attended the caucus, which we did virtually this year. And in the course of the caucus, I got talked into becoming a precinct organizer. And at first I wasn't sure I wanted to, I wasn't sure I had time, but I also was like, you know, this could be a good way for me to just get to know more people and, you know, get a little bit more involved in my community and involved in what's going on. And I was guaranteed that it wasn't a huge time commitment. So they've already had a couple of meetings that again are virtual, because a lot of them are like statewide. And I'm not sure I can keep doing it because it's so partisan. It kind of makes me feel sick to my stomach. Like I told my husband, I just said, they're just like, rah, rah, rah. We have to get everybody to be voting straight down the ticket. We can't have these situations where people are cherry picking and choosing from both sides of the ballot. And I was like, no, this is against everything I do in MWEG. And so I'm considering quitting, but I'm also like, so this is I guess the challenge I find is, and I don't know if I have a question that anybody can answer, but really I just have this feeling of like, I feel like it gives me great power as a voter in some instances. And I think it's given me a lot of power to even persuade other people to think differently about their ideas, because they can see that I'm coming from a place of principle and not partisanship. But where I'm actually trying to get involved in the system, I feel like I can't do it. Does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes. And I relate to Lara. I'm also a registered member of a party for the same reason, because that's the only way I can be involved. Where I live, one party dominates. So if I want to have any kind of power or influence, I need to be able to be in the caucus system and vote in the primaries, which I have to be registered to do. And so from a personal perspective, I can do, as like David French said, hold that affiliation very, very lightly. But yeah, within the system, it can be pretty frustrating. And I don't really have an answer to that other than the long-term persuasion we're working on to help people become principled citizens and principled voters outside of party. And it's a frustration I share, though. I don't really have an answer. If anybody else has any ideas.
Well, that makes me feel better to be like, okay, even Megan is involved in that way. And I think on the one hand, like the idea of getting to know the people in my precinct is appealing to me, because they are my neighbors and they are my immediate community. And I think it's these statewide calls with the party operatives that I'm like, can I just be a precinct captain and not go to any of your meetings? Can I do that? Like, and maybe I will, but I think that's where I feel like, because I do want to be able to meet these people who are my neighbors, I feel less hopeful, I guess, about being the one person on the Zoom call who can be like, hey, can I bring up this point that maybe we should cherry pick on the ballot? Right. But I like that idea of thinking about long-term persuasion and so.
Long-term is helpful. And it's also helpful if you, and I don't know how you, in Utah chapter of MWEG, we had several people who were state delegates and they found each other and they created a support group of principled delegates at the state convention, and they had a great time together. They had some very positive experiences. And so, I mean, sometimes you're looking out there for somebody else and maybe you persuade them to be a principled voter, and then you can kind of team up and support each other, which I don't know how that works in a caucus system like you're describing, but it's an idea.
Yeah, no, you've given me some good stuff to think about. I'm still thinking about quitting, but we'll see. Thank you.
Give up, Jalaire. Hey, so Jen Thomas actually had a comment. It wasn't letting her, but she just said, she just wanted to say she's really grateful for the emphasis on the small things that are within our control. And I like that Megan said that too. She said, we make good citizenship too big, and we don't need to be aggressive activists in all the spaces. We need to be compassionate community builders and thoughtful voters. And that's in those four things, the four ways of letting go of partisanship, building that community, building that trust, and the compassion part is what's really important. And so I would say, Julia, don't quit being in that precinct or whatever it is that you're involved with. I think that you can even speak up and say, well, I disagree. Use those practical peacemaking skills and say, well, I disagree that maybe this isn't the best way or whatever, but or say nothing. But
right. I should be braver.
But also, sometimes it's just a learning experience for you as well. And like for all of us, as we get involved in our community and we just listen, we get to go and be part of it and listen and learn before we speak up and share the convictions, because sometimes we have to let those ruminate and sit with that for a little bit and decide how we really feel about it, right? And if it's something that's something we want to go on.
So that's one of the things that I really appreciate about MWEG is what Jen says, is that we don't have to be doing all the things. We do some things. And I appreciate that as an organization, but also just being connected with these people who I can see are doing all the things, but nobody individually is doing it all. And so I feel like it makes me feel a lot better about life to know that I have a friend who is working with refugees. I live in a small town and don't have a lot of money. This is not something I can be doing, but I can support her in her work and do what I can do in my area. So I appreciate that thought a lot. Are there any others? Rachel?
No, I don't see any others. We will definitely, as people watch it, the recording back through the Facebook discussion group, there's always a great discussion. So I would encourage people to go there and add any comments after, as you think about it, to share those with other members of MWEG in the discussion group. And I've posted the links in the discussion group to the talks and articles that Megan had mentioned. So people can go and read those. I'm looking forward to reading the David French article in a little bit more depth, because I feel like that's kind of where we are. I too live in a state where I have an affiliation to a party, but not in my heart, just on paper. And I wish that it was kind of across the board, that you could just say, no, I'm an independent type, but even claiming an independent kind of puts you with a place, but that it didn't hold so much weight because or limit you, I guess, in a lot of cases, claiming independency in from any political party limits what you get to do. And so obviously for those of us that need to affiliate for a voice, that's what we do. But Megan, thank you so much. I will post the 4 ways that, and I'll just reiterate for people, it's compassion, community, trust, and hope that Megan mentioned, and she can expand on those more if she wants to in the discussion group, or you can just listen and do that. But I'll list those in the comments just for people to remember, but and post questions.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. We look forward to next week's Grow will be our practical peacemaking. So join us then. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.